All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I'm extremely humbled, honored, and grateful that we have with us today the one and only Mr. Sean Cahill. I know that my audience, and especially my members, but including my public audience, they really, really love what Sean has to say, and they want to hear what he has to say, especially because there are so many things that are moving so quickly in a fluid sense in terms of what's happening in the community, and even beyond that, as perhaps as a ripple effect that people may not notice as clearly, but is still there nonetheless. So before we bring Sean in, brother, thank you so much, Brandon, for joining me today. Well, thank you for having me in your studio, of course, to do this. And without further ado, Sean, how are you, man? And let's get right to it. I'm sure there's quite a few things that we've already started talking about beforehand that we could touch upon, in addition to some questions that I have here as well. So how's everything?
I'm doing well, man. Really good. Feeling real positive, healthy, happy.
Awesome.
Today's a good day. Let's get to it.
Awesome. Well, first off, let me just start with something that I had seen you discuss on Tim Ventura's show, I believe maybe a month or two ago, approximately, where you were asked about crash retrievals. Now, of course, if there's things you can't comment on, please just let us know. But in a sort of unofficial capacity, is there any credence to the possibility that in any unofficial regard, sort of through the rumor mill, that there is, say, perhaps some apparatus that has been retrieving some of these craft, regardless of putting aside for a moment the origin of where they may be from, but some type of exotic apparatus that is not Russian, Chinese, nor American?
I'd say that the historical evidence that a lot of people have collected over the years does point towards crash retrieval. I think that pragmatic people, if they look at what are the unclassified programs in regards to retrieving crashed aircraft, aerospace assets, anything that enters our flight pattern or our airspace, there are teams embedded within our military that exist solely for the purpose of arriving on scene, securing the scene, and ensuring that no classified or national security data is at risk. So we're talking about now unidentified craft that may or may not have been brought down, shot down, crashed, had some kind of problem with them.
Right.
If that has occurred, I believe that the cognizant military in the area, and or if there's a superpower that may be allied with that specific area, would most certainly initiate a crash retrieval program of some kind. Now, I think what a lot of people don't understand is there's you've got the pragmatic picture of prosaic crash retrieval that occurs every time a crash occurs. When things enter our atmosphere that are unknown, we and reach the ground, as a meteorite or a bolide of some kind, we go and we investigate that. So it's a natural progression to assume that now that we've acknowledged that UAP are real, now that we've acknowledged by Congress telling our folks at the UAPTF to engage the past 75 years of history, they're going to reach the point where they realize that crash retrievals most likely occurred involving UAP, but that information is classified and people without clearances, need to know, et cetera, will not see that information until it's made unclassified or until they reach a level where they have a need to know. So it's not mental gymnastics. It's actually a very simple addition of evidence in a Socratic argument. These things are here. They are in the atmosphere. They enter our area of responsibility. We've just seen us shoot down unknowns that we all assume were prosaic balloons in a couple of cases and are still unknowns in others. So I think this is where we have to engage our logic. I do believe that crash retrievals of what I will call UAP have occurred. Again, not speculating on the origin. I think it's pretty darn clear. The question is will the UAPTF be able to find a case within those archives? Will they be granted the need to know to see those archives? And when they do they have the know-how or the advisors to tell them which ones to pull out of there that won't damage national security, but that will finally give the people an understanding of where to begin thinking about this 75 to 80 year problem?
Do you think that, so I'm not sure if you want to jump in, but do you think there are certain, say, do you think it is safe to hypothesize there are certain cases that to a certain degree or percentage, if taken out of that classified setting, could be shared with the public in an appropriate fashion that still doesn't damage national security?
I do. There are cases that surround World War II.
Right.
We can even go specifically to Roswell. And granted, someone is going to have to do a walk back on Project Mogul and the nonsense of people conflating events that were completely unconnected 10 years apart.
Right.
Which let's remember, this doesn't match the early eyewitness account. We have the infamous photo of Jesse Marcel holding the telegram that forensic investigation has proven, if nothing else, that telegram was a ridiculously unprofessional communication
right.
amongst military leadership about an incredibly serious topic that they then rolled right into the classification system. That would be the place to start for me. It's what everybody wants to know is what started all this for us. Why did it really start? What really happened? And I think a lot of us expect that there will still be secrets after we're told that. And I assume that leadership will keep secrets that keep us safe. But at the same time, with all of the speculation, with 75 years of entertainment in regards to this topic, with the Marvel movies bringing the ideas of quantum theory, multiverse, and things like that to an average person's understanding, it's time to have this conversation.
Right. It reminds me even of the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, I believe it's called. And to your point, there seems to be this push in a certain regard to be able to help the average individual open their mind to these possibilities. And with that said, we see, for example, that as of the last handful of hours previous, that relative to us recording this right now, Dr. or Professor Gary Nolan had stated at a conference, which was, I must give it to him in the sense of the fact that he's stating this at a particular conference in which this is not some type of, a conference or some type of gathering that's in like someone's garage or their basement or something. This is a very serious conference, very respected conference that he was at, where he stated, and I'm just paraphrasing here, that there is some type of, we could say, there is certainly evidence of some type of, I say this very carefully, non-human perhaps presence or origin at play here in terms of whether it has to do with craft or beings or anything like this. And if I can ask your comment or your speculation or interpretation when you see someone like Dr. Nolan coming out and making those claims or statements.
I've had the opportunity to meet Dr. Nolan. I consider him a friend. I put a great deal of trust in his words. And I have to say this. There are a lot of people out there in lofty positions that like to speculate on this subject. Right. A lot of people that feel that their bona fides or their past work or their leadership should in some way make them eligible for a read-in to programs that they don't have clearances for, that they weren't involved with, and that somehow that they should be brought in like in a movie, like where something incredible happens, like The Arrival, and the helicopter goes around and picks up all the great minds and brings them.
Right.
And I don't mean to be flippant. Some of these folks have incredible minds.
Right.
However, pardon me. However, what that comes down to is Dr. Gary Nolan had the clearances. He worked on these programs. And he worked with people who had commensurate clearances, who worked on ancillary and parallel programs. And I'm speculating here, but I'm sure he was involved in networking and information sharing in regards to these topics. So if there's a subject matter expert, Dr. Gary Nolan is most certainly one of those people. And when he speaks on these topics, I think we need to listen very, very carefully. And we need to listen to the people who held those clearances, the people who worked in those fields. I've been lucky enough to be present when Dr. Nolan was outed in front of some of his colleagues in a planned fashion by Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon. It was really an honor to see the astonishment, the incredulity, and finally the respect that settled in amongst an audience of incredibly educated professionals, medical professionals, oncologists, and other educators, Nobel Prize winners, CEOs, and leaders of industry. as it dawned on them that someone that they had a great deal of respect for and had worked with for decades had been working on these incredibly courageous and bold programs with three-letter agencies, had gained the trust of the United States government, and was seen as such a great intellect and expert in his field that he was one of the few that was shown evidence about this great mystery we're talking about. So when Dr. Nolan has an opinion, that opinion is one that I listen to very, very seriously.
Well, one thing that is to just before we get off of this particular subject here, one thing I found quite peculiar was that when Dr. Nolan, I believe he's been on more than once, but I recall seeing him on bringing an X-ray scan, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, of a particular, I believe, soldier's or pilot's brain on Tucker Carlson to show the type of energetic effects this could have on a pilot or anything like this. And essentially, a lot of people pointed out very subtly, more so on Reddit and Twitter, that if you look closely at this scan, this document that he showed publicly on Tucker, you could see on the top right, it seemed to have belonged to the Department of Energy. So my question would be, in a speculative sense, would you imagine that a lot of this compartmentalization of these alleged programs would be residing more so in private industry, more so in the DOE, or perhaps a myriad of scattering all over the place?
I think we're looking at something that it really depends on who discovers, takes an interest in, or opens a program, project, or funds some kind of think tank related apparatus towards this to do research on the subject. I think that's happened many times. So I think we have natural stovepiping that the government will do to keep things compartmentalized. And then there will be a kind of ad hoc stovepiping that's happened, because remember, we've dealt with this for 80 years. So it's not one of those things that has just resided with government research or the military industrial complex. One can be assured that at some point, someone, not everyone so flippantly denies this subject like Elon Musk does. I'm sure that other aerospace captains of industry, et cetera, have taken a great interest in this subject. So when we say, where do these secrets reside, I think it may be situational. I think if we're looking at something that says Department of Energy in the upper right-hand corner, then the reason it was taken seriously is probably because this asset either was in or around an asset that was under the cognizance of DOE,
right,
or it exhibited an energetic state or an ability to create power at a level that would have been under the cognizance of the DOE had it been theirs. So if it's from a third party nation, right, another nation state, it doesn't seem like that. The pragmatic science tells us no one's outstripped anyone by a mile like that. Right. So it really depends on the context of where we're looking. Does Department of Navy share information about UAP over their non-nuclear assets, right, with DOE, or is only the information around the nuclear assets shared? I don't know what the conduits for like that work. Unfortunately, a lot of times in government, what needs to be reported to some people may not be reported, or people who could use the information or deal with it properly may not receive it just because the conduit may not exist.
Wow. And so with that said, Brandon, right before I let you jump in, if you like, would you say being a being a veteran yourself, and again, thank you for your service, would it be of your opinion, whether it's personal experience or whether it's things you've heard officially or unofficially, that there may be more, we could say, anomalies occurring perhaps in our oceans than in the skies, potentially?
Well, I'm happy to comment on that because of my personal experience in 2004 with the Tic Tac, and then the subsequent investigations that Lou Elizondo and I did down in and around Ensenada and the island of Guadalupe for the television show Unidentified on History Channel. There's most definitely what I would consider a presence in our oceans. Now, when I say a presence, I often go back to the 5 observables, and I'll just really quickly say that for folks who don't know them, I would say, pardon me, look them up. We won't take time explaining them today, but one of them is transmedium travel. And transmedium travel is the ability for a craft to come through, say, from the vacuum into the atmosphere, into the hydrosphere or the ocean, without disturbing those mediums, having full control of them and having full autonomy of movement, so to speak, not slowed down by the medium. This tells me that coupled with the other 5 observables, the low observability, especially in anti-gravity, that a craft that had these abilities, that was exhibiting them, would certainly be able to loiter almost anywhere they wanted to. And our bathymetric data, we have a hard time finding our adversaries in their quietest technology. So I'm sure that at some point, this unknown technology, if we can't detect them in the sky with impunity, I doubt we're detecting them in the sea with impunity. It would be a perfect place to hide.
Right. Thank you. Well, Brandon, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you again for your service. A high reverence for folks that choose that. I am curious about the barriers of disclosure. So one of the things that we talk about with this is the idea that it's going to ruin the economic system and that Christians are going to lose their shit because they can't fathom a universe and that hasn't been included in the teachings, right? So with all of that in mind, do you find that those are acceptable reasons to hold disclosure off in your mind?
I think that those are outdated. I think that those come from a time more akin to the 1980s. When there was a different resurgence in fundamentalism, especially here within the United States. It would seem that the brand of Christian fundamentalism in the United States now seems to have embraced a New Age mentality, and in a lot of cases, I've seen that that this topic seems acceptable and palatable to many who hold faith in Christ. And other Abrahamic religions, frankly. I do find that people who have a more fundamentalist lean are willing to accept it, but here's where the breakdown occurs. They take the exit on the freeway before the destination that is their explanations for their beliefs.
Yes.
And so many people like to tailor and cherry pick what they see and say, well, this works for me and this works for me and I believe in this, and this is where I think the three of us could argue well, because if we were having a laid back kind of hippie conversation, we might use a phrase like, if it resonates with you.
Right.
It's a very, very overused phrase now, because if you haven't attained the personal discernment of what resonates with your ego, what resonates with your heart, all you're doing is feeding your dopamine constantly. So let me add to that I've had, I had an extended interview with Catholic Universe, the leading Catholic publication right now. Had a long, lengthy 6-hour conversation with the author of the article. He went on to write a few more. And I've had other conversations with some officials in the church who had questions about the topic and had reached out. The Catholic Church seems ready and willing, as long as someone else takes the first step in disclosure, right, to fall in behind and say their part, what they believe their duties are in regards to baptism, acceptance, eschatology, and those ideas. The Catholic Church is actually rather modern about it. That said, those are outdated ideas. And I think those ideas are pushed by folks who are still feeding the fear complex, right, around this subject. We're at a point now where if someone has an opinion on UAP, it's a pretty solid opinion. They're well informed enough at this point that most folks, if they're paying attention at all, have an opinion and they're ready for answers and they're listening. It's not just the UFO community anymore. This has reached the mainstream. People are asking serious, pointed questions. So I think a lot of the old ideas that people were going to lose their mind, that there might be a purge of some kind if we found out there was a non-human intelligence present, I don't think that would cause a great panic. Now, if we started getting into structure of reality, ideas of karma, ideas of how much your intent can change the physical, what we would otherwise call the physical or gross material around you in the universe. Right. there's a lot of people that aren't ready for those kind of ideas, I think. The consciousness aspect, the idea that our perceptions can be manipulated, that our memories can be changed with or without direct manipulation. Those things are a little bit more scary than the idea of a non-human intelligence.
Right. Well, to that point, if I would like to read a question here from one of my members, Jared. And Jared, I love you, brother. This one's for you, man, for when you watch or listen to this, because he's a big fan of yours. So Jared asks, he's got a couple, so I'll ask as many as I can in terms of the flow of the conversation. How often, Mr. Cahill, how often do semantics keep us from gaining ground with understanding the phenomenon? For example, people who consider themselves religious have a hard time believing or even considering, hypothetically, that we may live in some type of simulation, but then we'll say that mankind was made in God's image. I, sir, personally don't see the difference in the two ideas. How about yourself?
I really don't anymore.
Right.
There was a time when I was bothered by the idea of a simulation. There was a time in evolving my own hypothesis on our reality that this was an involuntary existence of some kind. At that point that I had a level of pain and discomfort in my life, and I couldn't find my way around that pain. I was living in it. So for me, the idea of this being involuntary was very real. But as I refined some of those ideas, the idea of a simulation no longer bothered me. I started realizing that we surround ourselves with simulations. A book is a simulation.
Right.
The Bible itself is an attempt at a simulation of our deep past and our interactions with something greater than us.
Right.
It's not a true representation. It's just the best reflection of the photon of those events that we have. Right. So when we get down to that, it's not a far leap for me to say that, well, physics of the universe seem ubiquitous. Everywhere we look, 1 + 1 does seem to equal 2 at the end of the equation. Therefore, I can accept that DNA may be ubiquitous throughout the universe, that it may be written into the very structure. It may be the way that gross matter does eventually self-assemble into something that has the ability to perceive its greater universe in more detail and return something back to these higher dimensions that we don't yet understand, even though our math shows them to us. We don't like to acknowledge, we like to say that photons appear. We don't like to think that they're waiting somewhere for their mission.
Like in a waiting room or a time domain of sorts.
Right.
Right.
And we speak of these, we're very quick to say that we live in 3 dimensions plus 1 of time. Just like we're very quick to say that when we go to sleep at night, it's just a dream.
Right.
We haven't found the spatial nature to these other dimensions. We haven't found a way for our greatest mathematicians and physicists who can explain the topology and the structure of these things to us. They still have not reached a place where their imagination says, well, is that an elsewhere to here? Right. And what are my connections to these other levels of reality? A lot of aspects, and I'll get off of this for a minute so we can move to another question, but a lot of aspects of our science are beginning to look at this as if, what if we are expressions of a higher dimensional idea?
Right. Which would speak to fractality, perhaps.
Exactly.
Right.
And we find ourselves at that center point of the universe. Everywhere we look, we are coming up with more and more excuses for why we seem to be at the middle of things.
Even your own perspective, lights will come across and come straight to you on all the lights angled to you whenever you're looking at reflections across the water. Right. And then for someone standing 10 feet away, they do the same for them as well.
Right. Yes. Did you have anything else you wanted to?
Tons, but please.
No, please,
go ahead.
If you want to go ahead.
I'm honestly, you got to the reality thing, and that's where I'm at, brother. So I'm going to go with you on this for a second. This is what I honestly think, to answer my own question about barriers of disclosure, the barrier of disclosure is, because when you start rewriting what reality is, which I feel has been the game here, it's been this delusion, and this could go in many different directions. So we'll just say it for now that I've found it to be useful for the expansion of consciousness. I don't see it as a bad guy necessarily. I see it operating in the exact way it needs to in response to those that need that reading level articulated in that way. So, and you can find this in your own life, right? You evolve out of the energies and you no longer connect with them because they're no longer serve you. So in this way, like you said, it's a big, for lack of a better term, mind fuck to know that you're it and you're creating everything, and that really this collective creative process that could be viewed in that way. But then even you can get down to a conversation about consensus reality just being absolutely nil altogether, simply due to your reticular activating system and how we perceive reality as useless or not based on our paradigm. Like that just trips me out, all of these things. But what I will say is that that's what I feel the real barrier to disclosure is. It's the fact that what you are, what this place is, all of those things have been so grossly reduced, misapprehended, and intentionally and deliberately inverted to the point to where it's such an ingrained thing. But again, I needed to see it that way to wake me up. I don't know about you. But this feels, and it's valuable, but this on scale is where we're talking, where I feel the real barrier to entry is. It's got nothing to do with the oil companies. I think that we'd be fine with that if cognitively we were aligned with that anyway. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's just this more of a psychological. I mean, it's all right there, right? It's more of a psychological component to the zeitgeist. That's what we're acclimating, is what I will say. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that I lived a life of trust. I trusted those who were bigger than me and smarter than me and older than me. I was one of those kids that needed it explained to me twice. I didn't get it. So when the rest of the class was already starting on the assignment, I was still, I didn't know what to do. So that led to a life of disappointment. Because let's be real, most of us don't find our place or find ourselves in incredibly nurturing environments where the people around us are always positively oriented and patient and everything. So a lifetime of disappointment led me to think that this place was a mistake. That somehow the way that this life felt, I had ended up here via something I must have done wrong at some point. And so that led to this idea, well, if that's the case, what is being right? And I think for a lot of people that starts with faking it till you make it. You put on the fake smile, you try to do things, nice things for other people. If we're lucky, we get to a point where we realize, geez, people who don't ask for things don't usually want things. So maybe I should stop. So now I realize it's okay, that's self-serving. I'm trying to pay people back for my karma. Long story short is I got to a point where I had a moment where I had the opportunity to lose something that was very dear to me. And my ego wanted to win the argument more than it wanted to win the thing that was dear to me. And I realized in that moment, I was like, every moment is a choice. Every single moment is a choice, and every moment may be a fight for a long time, but it doesn't have to be. There is a, I don't like this phrase because it's overused, but there is a path of least resistance that can be taken. And that path of least resistance has led to the most authentic, beautiful feelings in my life, has lowered my stress, lowered my anger. I'm nearly incapable of saying I hate something anymore. And that's one of the most beautiful feelings I've ever felt in my life. So I think I finally found the school aspect of this simulation. And I finally found that there are lessons to be learned, and they're not always cake and ice cream and hugs. Sometimes they're car accidents and abuse or divorce or lies. And Dave, you and I have talked about this plenty of times. You know, you and I will get to a point in the conversation, we may be talking about our personal lives, and I'll go like this.
Right.
Because that's life. Life is peaks and valleys. And if we cry in the valleys and raise our fist at the top of every peak, I think we're missing the journey. We're just
you
on
got to learn to
coaster.
surf, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Anything else?
Outstanding. No, incredible way to answer it. And I do appreciate that. But I completely agree. And so this has been part of our focus, you know, just to be the lighthouse, like let folks know that it's fun to play and that's what we're here for. And that, you know, give people back to themselves. That's our mission. So thanks for the answer. It was wonderful.
One thing I would like to ask, this is something that's a little bit, I think, a few years old in terms of, relevance in the question. But the reason I like to bring this up is because perhaps I could be wrong here. So please let me know if it's something that you can't comment or even speculate on, which would be understandable completely. But with regards to Mr. Christopher Mellon's slide 9 leak, with respects to the slide saying things like, for example, what we considered, phenomena, or excuse me, what was once considered phenomena is now quantum physics, things like this. Is this anything you can comment on relative to what you may be hearing officially or unofficially in any regard, whether energetically, physically, etc.?
Mm-hmm. I had the great honor and opportunity to attend a meeting in Colorado Springs. You're aware of that, with some of the largest names in pragmatic research in this field ever, frankly.
Right.
I would say that there is a level of understanding within the academia that is connected to the subject, that aspects of the 5 observables that we have seen from these craft do seem to indicate certain aspects of our theoretical physics to be absolutely spot on in certain directions. And so I believe that there are people doing very serious research into those areas. And I think that there are areas within our research and development cadre of the West that are very interested in no longer classifying certain things as hypotheses and being bold and taking them into theoretical territory, where R&D occurs, where real research, real fundamentals are established, and real benchmarks are noted.
Perhaps, dare I say, experimentation, or would that be taking it too far?
Oh, I'm sure experimentation is the benchmark of the scientific process.
Right.
We must experiment. We must prove our hypotheses wrong or our theories wrong at every turn that we can. The question that I have, based on rumor surrounding metamaterial, is: do we currently, and we may have to go back and talk about what metamaterial is, but do we currently have the manufacturing capabilities to mimic, or even come close to mimicking, the incredibly complex and organized nature of these materials? We're not sure how some of them are bonded. We're not sure what the exact origin of them is. And frankly, at least in the private sector, we can only speculate on what they're used for. There's a lot of rumor around terahertz waveguides and achieving levels of energy that are beyond our current capabilities. The fact is if you look back through the zeitgeist surrounding our greater aerospace dreams, because the dream has always been to negate gravity, because the dream is always to reduce cost of moving cargo into orbit to as low as possible.
Right.
So whether connected to the UAP topic or whether just through the pragmatic advancement of our physics, I think slide 9 is very telling, that we got to see something that we're not read into. And the fact is that at the level of an Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, the briefing says we have a clue.
Right, got you. Because it's interesting to your point, if I may add, for more so for the audience, there was a piece of footage, I believe, from maybe 3-4 years ago, approximately, where Mr. Elizondo was having a conversation with Dr. Pudov, and Dr. Pudov was talking about metamaterials and how the elements found in these alleged metamaterials, regardless of their origin, are not necessarily comprised of any elements that we're not familiar with relative to our periodic table, but more so that there's a stacking, if you will, but of various elements in like a topological sense. And that is where things get very, very complex. And I find that I appreciate your response there, because I mean, as some of my audience knows, with respects to my diving into physics and what have you, it gets extremely complex and heady. And I can only imagine that scaling up to having even a team of individuals look into this is still something where the progress in general may take a lot longer, at least time-wise, than many may think. And so I find that very peculiar.
Yeah. I think that what a lot of people may not understand is even removing the veil of stovepiping and things and need to know, what we're talking about may be material and ideas and subjects and physics, pardon my use of these words, but from a realm that we're not familiar with.
Right.
And therefore, when, if I handed, this is a very crude metaphor, but if I handed a Stone Age person an iPhone, they would have no idea what they were looking at.
Right.
Even if it was powered up, it's hit or miss whether they'd ever actually turn it on or just use it for a black mirror for a moment and then smash it and run away from it.
Right. Well, they would call just the screen turning on if they could get it to turn on. I would wager that they would write in what we now call history books and all of that it was some type of magical whatever, word.
Certainly. Yeah. So we're left with the idea that how long did it take for how many people had to look at a piece of slagged metamaterial before someone went, oh, that's a thingamabob? We may not know what we're looking at in all cases. It may, even once the forensic analysis of these materials is done, if we don't have the theoretical imagination to apply it, not to get into the, Nikola Tesla is relied upon by too many in the fringe as proof. There's too many YouTubes now with quips and quotes and anecdotes that we can't exactly verify. However, along Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, numerous other great minds, at some point along the way, when asked, where does your inspiration come from? They all said, it comes from my imagination. It comes from my dreams. It comes from my daydreams, or I'm visited by someone in a dream and it's brought to me. So these ideas exist. I think sometimes we do have to pull them out of the ether. The question is whose schedule does the ether respond to?
Wow, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the question. So I want to come back to the simulation real quick, because I've talked about this a lot, Sean. The idea of it being this prison planet idea, or even the Saturn moon matrix that Dave Icke talks about and things like this. I've even gotten it so far to where the Vitruvian man, that's your reality, that your reality ends right here at the tip of your finger. And that vastness and scale can be coded into your perception. So really don't need to render. So
there's like a rendering of that vastness temporarily.
Yeah. So that's the thing about a simulation. We always talk about this idea of that it would take a planet size computer to run that thing, but maybe. And now if you want to do that to render an entire environment, we're speculating wildly here, but that's fun. So what I would say though, is that you don't even need that. You don't even need that scalability. You just need to be able to 100%, or just to the degree that you wish, apprehend the perception of the occupant. Because you could perceive wind blowing from a far place. You could perceive the Grand Canyon. Like those are just electrical impulses. Right. You don't need to build a whole huge things, even if you're not rendering what's behind you in the game model, right? Right. To save power and all that shit. So my question is if this is a thing, I'm not a fan of the idea, but I'm also, it's whatever. I'm more of a sovereignty person, but that's okay. So UFOs and tech, do we think that could be a way out? I'll add to this, like the Brevnikov idea where he's strapping bug wings together to a very reductive thing. He's strapping bug wings together, flying around. It seems that there are clues left all over the place in the form of sacred geometry, in the form of microscopic, in the form of as above, so below. We see plasma man,
lasers and light.
Laser man, light. Yeah. I mean, everything. The Ankh, we see all of these things. And then we also find, it seems now in our purview, not only some coming in to visit us as an example of what's capable of, they're like, hey, check this out. You guys can make one of these, zip, and then they're gone. It's like, what the fuck was that? Right. And then you go investigate it. But the thing is it seems to be found here. So then I'm looking at this place, if it is what we've talked about here, this constructed reality that seems fairly limited as far as our imagination at least can perceive. Could it be some sort of like escape room? Have you ever done an escape room, Sean? Where you go in,
but my kids are doing one tonight.
So. Oh my God, dude, they're a blast. Yeah. Like my wife crushes it at those things. We're like, what's next? And she turns a lamp on. The lampshade has everything on it. We're like, what? They're crazy.
If I may add very quickly to the question in general, I think the question also becomes, to what parameter or threshold do these alleged craft contain the ability to, quote, get out of here, if at all?
Is it some sort of escape room? Meaning I'm with you also with this, because you get to that frustrated point where you feel claustrophobic. And you're like, oh, we're gods with amnesia or something, but really a lesson, more of an appropriative, because this is also when we bring up the conversation of time and we're like, oh, time doesn't exist. It's like, well, we have a perception of it here, so it must be useful. And to that, I would say then that duration, gives you change. So that's how you affect change and growth which is what time is useful for in this realm. But what I would say to that then is, do you think this is like a huge escape room kind of a thing? And that really we get to a point evolutionarily or mentally or cognitively or all the above where we can find these things, maybe rebuild the pyramids or something.
Where perhaps self-awareness is that doorway out.
That's it. It's the Truman Show. It's the exit because you've sailed off. You said, fuck off to that. You know, it gives you enough things back there, like the stuff NASA's displaying, whatever they're doing. It shows you what's not. And so you're able to dial your compass in, you know, and that's what discernment in my mind's all about. So I know there's a long question. What I mean to say is, do you feel that it's that or anything like it? And that if so, are UFOs perhaps the way out?
Dave kind of stole my mojo. It is self-awareness, in my opinion. A person in solitary confinement can become Buddha or can beat their head against the wall and give themselves brain damage within a week or within an hour.
That's very well said.
It's alchemy. It's both energies. Right. Absolutely.
I have a lot of friends outside of, we'll say the military industrial complex and government service, et cetera, that are involved with remote viewing based on the legacy programs that were developed at Stanford Research Institute and then later by Army. I have my own opinions on the validity of analytical overlay as it goes with remote viewing, but in my own experience, remote viewing does have efficacy and value. A great deal of remote viewers who are not otherwise invested in these answers have been involved in blind remote viewing sessions where different disparate groups seem to have corroborated the idea of this going into the light that we all talk about during near-death experiences. Obviously, we've only talked to people who've had near-death experiences, except for an alleged one guy who came back.
Right.
So we don't have a lot of eyewitness accounts of what happens after you die. I've had an out-of-body experience during a medical procedure. Mine involved nothing religious. It was just local to the room of the operation, but it gave me a perception that my consciousness could be separate from my physical body. I say all this because there was a time period where I was one of those people who would, if we were hanging out having the deep, weird, woo-woo conversations late into the night where we were getting into speculation and, you know, where there were no rules, I might lean over to you and go, don't go into the light.
Right.
Go around it. It's a ruse. It's aesthetic pain that's being offered to you in some weird Gnostic sense to come back. And there's a lot of our teachings that have been trying to tell us this in different mystery schools throughout the world. And so there was a period of time where I thought that was something that, you know, in the esoteric manner had some kind of wisdom to it. And within the last 6 months or so, I've just had some challenges that really caused I was either forced into self-awareness or self-destruction. And I like to think I chose self-awareness. And in those moments, something I realized was that may be the case. That aesthetic pain may be offered at the point of death to return into this system.
Right.
But if you've reached the point where that aesthetic pain is no longer attractive to you, then I don't think the light would be a ruse anymore. I think it's just a fork in the road.
Wow.
And so I do believe that there is a mystery to be solved within this existence. And I believe that mystery is earning back some kind of return to something that we had lost, that we had taken for granted, perhaps, in an energetic sense in our existence. So someone might point to that and say, well, that stinks of religion. No, I'm not. I don't want your money. I'm not telling you where to meet me, and we're not going to hang out together to talk about it. So it's not a
right. Right.
But I think that we have to graduate to a point where I've decided I'm here voluntarily, and I'm going to take responsibility for the remainder of this life.
So very well put, by the way.
Outstanding. Yes.
If I it is of my humble opinion that under the, let's say the presumptions of this discussion here, which is again speculative, of course, but I think, of course, without the speculation, we wouldn't have the ability to expand and all that intellectually and ideologically. But I would think that perhaps it's not as simple, this reality, as hopping in a craft and going, zoop, okay, we're out of here type scenario. That's my humble perspective. Is that what you would liken that as well? That too as well?
I think this is, again, speculation.
Right.
I think we're going to see at least a dualistic bifurcation of UAP into the spiritual and the nuts and bolts.
Right.
Because it's my hypothesis that the nuts and bolts are merely a crude mimicry of something that may be possible at a higher energetic consciousness level.
Yeah, like anything that's tried to imitate nature.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what would a UAP be in those cases? Well, it's a bearskin. It's a set of eyeglasses to help you see better. It's the fire to keep you warm so you can move into more southern or northern latitudes where it's colder. They're tools. As surely as a pencil is a tool, as surely as a piece of flint is a tool, a UAP is a tool.
Right.
Now, that consciousness that's inside that UAP may be advanced to a point where I don't recognize it anymore.
Right.
Or where I may not be able to communicate with it. But if that consciousness is still here within this universe, this physicality that we seem locked into except for sleep right now, they may have an understanding of this simulation, or this layered simulation. I can easily use the metaphor in my own life that this is one hard drive where this game is running. Right. And there's a stack in the server of all of these different hard drives with different iterations of things running. And someone on one of those hard drives has figured out how to get their program into the conduit and onto another hard drive.
Right.
And then it's able to observe that this is very much like us. And perhaps I think that at some point in that, I don't know how far that would extend out to some iteration of 64 or some E8 lattice type of thing. Some block universe filled with little different boxes full of Boltzmann brains or something.
Right.
but the fact is that the math kind of says,
right. Yep.
That's where we're at. How come we can make a movie about it, but I can't get the physicists to talk about the concepts in the movie other than to push their new book? I need someone that's gonna I need a physicist to get really involved, like they did with Interstellar. Right. But the great thing about Interstellar was at the end, there were no caveats or excuses. They were like, no, this is the best we've done yet. We think this is as close as we've represented these ideas.
Or even perhaps like the film Tenet with respects to time and entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you and I were talking, Dave, the other day about this concept of, we have some of our sets of physics that say the universe might be a Klein bottle.
Right. Right.
And if it is, that means that there is a recurve at some point in our linear perception of time. At some point, there's a recurve into the past. If that past point precedes this now, we may be at these sacred sites around the world where we've rebuilt and we can kind of trace this forensic, what the hell is going on with these different types of megaliths, the nubs, the polygonal masonry, the trilithons that we still can't quite figure out how these folks were able to move them at their level of technology. What if each time someone enters the Klein bottle, they go back and start over again?
So this, if I may give a visual very quickly to something like this, for example, with respects to the fractalization of finite recursiveness, as you stated, that would be, as we zoom in more for the audience, there'd be zoom in to say one part of the infinite loop, in which is finite to a degree until it hits its border, and then you get to that next step, and then you get to the next one, and so on and so forth. Would this be perhaps maybe not a good one, but a general visualization of?
I think it's fantastic. I mean,
thank you.
It's almost like there's a sense that entropy governs the physical universe.
Right.
And some aspect, whether we can call it perhaps the evolution of self-awareness.
Right.
Counters that entropy somehow. Is that the pure mission? Is it different iterations of reducing the entropy of a given state? I'm not sure. That's wild generalization there, but unless this is purely a game for I don't know. We love to play games.
To my understanding,
I can't rule it out. I think it's varied.
I just want to say, you just described, by the way, phase, whether intentionally or not, phase locking in optical physics. Because what happens is the photons are in their own finite loop, respectively, until multiple vectors or beams are summed. And then I was saying this to Brandon just last night, if done appropriately, the particles end up, for lack of a better term, integrating and making love with one another rather than fighting. And fighting would be a representation of an explosion as we know it today, right? That's very interesting that you said. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so in this Klein bottle example, when they come back around, consciousness, when it re-enters at its origin point, do you then in this model, is that why there's a bunch of shit laying around as far as megaliths go? Like, do we rediscover these things that have been aged and that have like "don't climb on them" signs?
Oh, yeah. I think it's a wonderful argument when trying to flesh out these deep theories. We're left with a lot of really crappy evidence, because the first thing we're throwing out is the idea of a linear progression of time.
Right.
And we're accepting. So these are mental gymnastics. I'll go with the folks that are saying some of these are mental gymnastics. The first thing we have to accept is that we're only perceiving a linear progression of time.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I believe that there are physicists out there that can explain that in detail in a way that I can't, to say that it may be true. What I wonder is, I think the thing that we're missing from this argument is continuity of consciousness after death. And I think that a lot of people that are willing to have this conversation are willing to say there is a continuity of consciousness. There is a eternal nature to the essence of whatever we are that seems to exist, that seems to overlap what some people call past lives, alternate universes, things like that. I don't think everybody that's having an experience is having an experience that is based in the reality of this physical universe. I think that the signals do cross sometimes, probably within the realm of sleep.
Right.
But that said, that this metaphor we talked about, the Klein bottle and the return and having an impact in the past on the future, the perceived future.
Right.
It would be imperative, in my opinion, for a continuity of egoic consciousness, what we would call an egoic consciousness. Right. Because it would seem that the unencumbered self has no wants, has no needs, is as happy to stand before a supernova as it is a buffet.
Right.
It is here for the now, for this moment, for the experience, and it's going to write that into its long-term ledger. It would seem to me that for there to be a use, that unless you're sending, I don't know. If we keep sending back non-egoic perfect individuals, why do we keep having to do it over again?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, and to that though, then I would say then the continuity consciousness perhaps comes in what some may perceive as a limitation of what we feel is possible. So some folks would say then that this life is all there is, but perhaps this is just like the first chapter of a thing called life that's on a grander scale, that really you come back to this bitch, let's say on the event of an order of the precession of the equinoxes. Perhaps you come and reincarnate in that long cycle and you have that much time to figure it out. It's like a speed dating with Gaia thing. Right. And you come in and maybe this is sort of like a paintball wars event for your kids on the other side. You're just like the dad coming and running around. This could be reduced to that simple of an experience as far as some other entity is concerned. We could look like squid beings on the other side. I don't know.
Right.
So what I mean to say is that this idea, and Archaics put this out, I believe, is like, the fun theory about the pyramids. I love this one, that there's sort of a reset every 100 and whatever years. Humanity, the pyramids have always been here, and that humanity gets to a point to where they get to technologically be able to rebuild them. But the second that they put the capstone on, it resets all of reality and destroys the pyramids. And so then you come back around to figure it out again. And so it is like this loop.
Right.
But again, it could be this sort of stacked experience, like we talked about the metamaterials being stacked in a way.
Sort of like layers on an onion.
Absolutely.
Right.
So your experiences aren't limited to this one. It's many, but the fact that it's recursory, the fact that you forget, you go through this river of amnesia every time is part of the experience.
What I think of? I think of his Dark Materials, for those that have seen it, when they unzip the portal and then they zip it up again, you can just you just open it up and then you step through it and then you just kind of turn around, zip it up, and you're in the next.
See, and I kind of think this may be a possible explanation for what UFOs and shit are. They're just sort of employees of this place. They kind of come in, they kind of give people inspiration, wisdom. People always have massive changes after they affect the psychology.
Right.
Anyway.
What if UAP were also a way to cheat the system? What if it was a way to move an ego across the multiverse without it having to achieve enlightenment?
See, now we're talking, Sean.
Wow. It's interesting because
if you've got a maintenance system,
right?
Maintenance, let's say the maintenance system's driving the cop cars,
right?
And the maintenance system has their manual on their lap that they have to follow,
right?
And they have their job to do. But the Dukes of Hazzard are running around with their moonshine and their Daisy Dukes, jumping the cars over rivers and stuff.
Right.
And the cops, every time they try to do it, they break the car. I'm making a joke here based on the Dukes of Hazzard. I went a little down the rabbit hole, but
it's a good pull.
We don't have a full. I'm not a person who's like everything bad about UFOs must be the government.
Of course.
Right.
It's bad enough without having to go there. You know what I mean? So I know that nature's red in tooth and claw. I know that it really doesn't matter how far you seem to get in this existence. Success doesn't care whether you're good or bad. Power doesn't care whether you're good or bad.
Right.
The universe doesn't seem to care whether or not you break any perceived rules.
Right.
So I can see where a selfish or empirical species, if they develop this technology, would certainly be like, wait a minute, why are we utilizing resources in this finite entropy bubble?
Right.
Why don't we steal? If they're isotopically close enough, and it'll still build a brick wall, go get their stones,
Right.
Especially if no one's coming to stop them. It's almost the substitute teacher mentality, but the substitute teacher put on a movie and fell asleep.
It's that feeling like your kid, like in class when the substitute teacher, great example. It's like, that's it. That's all we're doing today. This is too easy.
Yeah. And then you just
imagine
picked on. Yeah.
That the resource needed to develop that technology, to cheat that system, to get ahead of the curve is the very thing that they come into other universes to take, because they kill two birds with one stone. They increase their power and reach, and they take out the competition. You're not going to evolve on your planet if you don't have enough of this material to make the technology to leave.
Literally a fractalized version on a much grander scale of what one could argue strongly many corporations do. Right.
Yeah.
Crap. Wow.
Yes.
Well, with that said, Sean, I know that we're coming up to the time limit, and I wanted to ask one more question from our friend Jared, who again is a big fan of yours, and he says that Mr. Cahill, one thing that seems to be apparent with any level of research, from a hobbyist like myself to someone like yourself, is that human beings are in some way very special. As you juggle the weird world of the phenomena and being a family man, what does it mean to be a human being to you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Jared. That's a good one.
It's funny because that feeling of specialness is very much around what it's like to be human most of the time.
Right.
We seek that feeling. I want to feel special when I walk in the room. I want to see your eyes light up. I hope you stand up to give me a big hug and you're happy to see me.
Right.
When we accomplish something, that's the feeling we want. We want the love and esteem of the people around us. We forget often that the way that we receive those things is by giving it. And it's not a trade. It's not I do for you, you do for me. What it turns out to be is I do for you, and after a while you realize you're safe and you're taken care of, and it's not a ruse. And so you do for me. And we all have these holes. Some of our holes are a little bit bigger and they take longer to fill, and some of us have very small holes that are easy to fulfill quickly. But it's not until we realize that we're all actually here for each other. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm not here to turn everybody into a communist that needs to give me half their sandwich and half their income so I can do this intellectual thing over there.
Right.
But at the same time, I want to support your dreams as long as they're not, and your desires, as long as they're not taking away from another human being.
Right.
That's what it means to be human to me. And so when I look at our system, when I see the way that a unencumbered, unbothered, untraumatized child chooses to act versus the way someone that has been conditioned to protect themselves, I see the true humanity in that unencumbered child. And I see what we could be if we had enough for each other, enough, if everybody had a little bit of food, shelter, and water and the ability to express themselves. And if we had a better understanding of not hoarding and overusing resources, I think that there's a whole universe out there that we've never even encountered yet. And I think there's a level of opportunity out there for humanity. As far as we can see, with the exception of the alleged UAP topic, the universe is empty.
Right.
I'm bothered more by the Fermi paradox or by the idea of a great filter than anything else. It's also the thing that probably informs the idea that we may be in some kind of special instanced simulation. Dave and I think we were talking the other day about, are we in a black hole and just looking at the lensed failures of every previous experience outside of this one?
With respect to like an event horizon. Yeah.
How many galaxies had to be created before life popped up? It just doesn't seem to be everywhere.
Or like you said, it's some sort of simulation in some sort of isolated simulation. Have you ever seen that The Village by M. Night Shyamalan? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
So that type of thing, to where we're like some ostracized, don't go. That's a no-fly zone. They don't know about y'all. Like, just leave them alone, kind of a thing.
Well, I wanted to bring up earlier. I'm sure both of you guys have worn a VR headset at some point.
Yeah.
And probably experience the discontinuity between those two things, even if it's only for a second. That second, if you're that kind of intellectual and you realize, I just forgot who the hell I was and where I was for a second.
Right.
Like I really thought I was in Minecraft or whatever,
Right.
That happens. And we've all seen grandma dive at the TV on the bloopers reels or, and stuff like that.
Table,
Yeah, that happens. People have those vestibular responses to these things. That's entry level VR. What does full immersion feel like? I think it feels like reality. So we're making we make these assumptions. We talk about the Matrix and Jack in the back of the head, and people say brain in a vat, and people talk about having out of body experiences, and they say, I saw my body in the vat, and I'm like, why would you see the body you're in now?
Yeah.
In a vat elsewhere, having, it's like
through what eyes that you don't have.
Right, your analytical overlay is telling you what you can handle.
Right.
What it told you is that based on the movies you've watched, the books you've read, and the stuff you believe, this is the best representation of your essences elsewhere having this experience.
The threshold, if you will. Right.
Well, and it sort of makes sense too, the amnesia then. If we come in to an amnesia point based exactly on what you said, man, it's an excellent example that we have another frame of reference for VR when we step into it. So we know that it's a different experience. But if you're born into the VR, you don't know it's VR.
Right.
If you put a VR headset on me that didn't like immediately feel like it, and I woke up in the morning wearing this thing, how long would it take?
Yeah.
Before I realized I wasn't dreaming? Like, if you know what I mean? Like if you didn't immediately be like, I'm wearing a hat, what the hell is this? If you just opened your eyes to say that, the Microsoft Windows, desktop screen with the blue green field and all that.
Right.
I know I'd give at least a minute of being like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's beautiful here.
Right.
It bothers the heck out of me. I think it would bother the heck out of a lot of other people, but
kind of like
I've tried to get out. I've tried to test that continuity of consciousness.
Then the question is it may only bother you because we forget that it's a chosen experience. Again, we're learning a lot here. There's a lot of dope. Right. There's waterfalls, there's butterflies, there's cool shit here too. And what I mean to say is that then it would be a point to where at this point, you get tired, right? Bill Hicks even says this about his analogy of the life being a ride. And he says, some people have been on the ride for a very long time. And for some, it's scary and it has its ups and downs, twists and turns. But you just remember, it's just a ride. I liken this to a psychedelic experience. Everything we've talked about, he's like physics, this, I'm like psychedelics are like that too. It all comes back to this psychonaut for well over 20 years.
Right.
So one of those perspectives is that it's a completely different reality, but that there's no off switch in psychedelics. Like once you're committed to it, let's say whenever I took a 10 strip of acid, I knew what I was doing for the next 16 hours, which was, I don't know what I'm doing for the next 16 hours, but I know that there's no off switch to this.
Right.
It's a commitment.
Right.
In the same way that life would be a commitment.
Yes. People enjoy this because they like when I talk about stuff Lou and I talk about, but we had a late night conversation, very deep after a couple of hours, just cooking dinner and having a couple of beers. And we were alone. We just got really deep into it. And the conversation ended with me kind of having an epiphany. And I went, holy crap, the universe is helter skelter. And he goes, what do you mean? And I go, it's the Beatles song, Helter Skelter. And I go, when you get to the bottom, you go back to the top of the slide where you stop and you turn and you go for a ride and you get to the bottom and I see you again.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And when I go to an amusement park with my kids, when I'm not being a humbug bastard, trying not to, have fun and everything, we go do the crazy ride. We get off the crazy ride, and if that park's empty, we're running to go back and do it again.
Hell
we can't wait.
Ride too. Yeah.
And on the run from the end of the ride to the beginning of the ride, we're talking about how awesome it was. And did you see that? And I heard so-and-so scream, and you sounded like a girl, and I thought I was going to fall out. And oh my God, I'm soaked. And whatever, all those things happen.
Right.
And then you get back in line, everybody kind of calms down a little bit. And then you go into that little zombie state, and we're all just kind of staring at each other's backs and shuffling forward. And then the adrenaline starts to rise and the nervousness starts. And even though you're going to be fine, you're like, oh, Jesus, here we go again. Right. And as soon as that thing goes, man, you forgot about your bills. Yeah. You forgot about the argument you had with your girl. You don't care that the hot dog cost $15. Right. You're screaming. You don't have your phone out interviewing yourself. Well, I am experiencing increased gravitational pull as we go around the corner. Maybe after 1,000 rides, you start doing that. And I think some of us, maybe the three of us, are on our 800th ride and we're finally starting to go, maybe I should take some notes. And that tree looked different on the last turn. What the hell's going on? And maybe we're, but I think in between we're still going, how was that? It was awesome, man. Yeah. They changed one of the trees. I noticed this time. Right. Let's go.
Totally. And even more to that, then it would be that you're all everything in the simulation. You can choose any of the characters here. So then as we're running back to the ride, I'm going, Dave, I want to play you this time. And you'd be like, dude, I want to be Brandon this time. And then we'd live each other's lives, right? And whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
I had a conversation with a loved one the other day where we were discussing this conceptually the same way.
Right.
And they said to me, why would we choose it if it's so hard? And I said, it feels hard when it's hard. It feels beautiful when it's beautiful. Yeah. Without the contrast, life is nothing. And we hate remembering that.
Right.
We don't like remembering.
I know this is an oversimplification given, again, that everyone in their own personal life has different struggles and beneficial things they're going through. But it's this idea perhaps that, again, perhaps oversimplifying, but you choose if you're having a good time or not. You choose if you're having a shitty time or not, basically.
And the barometer has to be your heart. It has to be your heart that chooses that. And that's the thing that it's so hard, man. Up until 10 years ago, I didn't acknowledge the heart as anything more than a blood pump. I was only beginning to open my eyes to the idea that it had an electromagnetic field. I didn't know anything about frequency, resonance, and those things that a lot of us end up learning about. I didn't meditate. I thought I was a meat animal having a meat existence. And this was a purely physical, materialistic world. I had challenged the universe to show me spirit, and I had determined that it hadn't done it good enough.
I see. And that threshold was
of the coin now. Yeah.
Right. So that threshold of your determining in this particular case that it was not good enough, that threshold was defined by you, and therefore the best person to hide something from you is you.
Yeah.
I know now, if you ask me, do you have everything you need?
Right.
I would only need to ask you, do you mean like right now, or like in life?
Right.
Because right now, of course I could use a cup of coffee or something else like that because I'm a monkey. But I do have everything I need. Is my life perfect? Hell no.
Right.
But there's a roof, there's food in my fridge, I have health care, I'm able to feed myself and protect my family.
Right.
After that, it is all choice.
Right.
Let me ask you
All
a
of
question.
it.
Is it? It is also a choice to see that it's not perfect. So let me ask you this: what would define a perfect life for you that you could grasp and exist in this existence?
See, this sucks because if we do have a ledger, if there is like some Anubis somewhere waiting at the end going, what's he about to say?
All right, he said it. Yeah.
You know, he's going to weigh me on the scales.
Remember,
All
I'm
right,
just a
here it
mirror
is.
to you, brother. That's all.
This would be so damn. I would be so bored if I had Elon's money after about 6 weeks. And I'm one of those guys who's been bitching and complaining his whole life that he didn't have enough money. I've coveted your laptop or your car or your ability to go on your vacations or whatever else. I'm a sorry son of a bitch. I don't know how to accept gifts well. You know, like I had that lack for my whole life, which is stupid because I grew up rich and was left money and all this other stuff, but never quite enough to not be going, well, crap, where do I get next month? You know what I mean?
Right.
And 20 years in the military offered a great deal of stability. I always knew what was coming, where it was coming. I felt rich the whole time because all my needs were met. Because my needs aren't. I'm not that guy who really needs the bigger TV. I'm not the guy who sees you get what you get. In very few cases is there something. I'm usually only envious when I can't get what I want. Well, I finally got to a point in my life where I looked around. I was like, what do you want? A different colored one now?
There you go. It's a great point.
Or one, you know, the one for your, you know, why not? What am I going to do now? Learn left-handed guitar?
Well, this speaks
I take my right-handed guitar for granted. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. Well, this speaks to, in my opinion, to perception and relativity. Right. For example, if we take this idea on a grander scale of someone extremely wealthy in a material regard, you know, oh, I just, you know, hopped on my private jet. It gets less and the value decreases each time you go on it to you as an individual. Yes. So it's kind of just, yeah.
I am used. Oh, this. What do you mean you don't have a green room and coffee?
Right. I see where you're going. Yep.
Like that's where my ego has gotten where I won't say anything.
Right.
But like, oh, I'm just going to stand here in the hallway for 10 minutes, 25 minutes until the next guy goes. All right.
Right.
You know, but it's one of the, like, I'm not a diva, but it's like, I just want a cup of coffee and a chair.
Yeah.
Or can I not have the conference attendees staring at me while but that's the same thing, man.
Right.
And we're human. And so my little monkey in me builds this tiny little bit of resentment. And they're like, well, I'm not going to do this one again.
Right.
It's like, man, what'd you come here for? Did you come here to talk to these folks or to get served?
Yeah,
right.
These are what psychedelics play a wonderful part in. Michael Pollan had a wonderful example of this on Joe Rogan's show about the snow and the hill. Just for the audience sake that maybe hadn't heard it, he related it to that whenever you snow down a hill, your sled tracks get built in and then there's grooves. And as you go down the hill, any way you go, usually they'll slip back into those grooves that have been channeled there as cursories and you won't go a new path. But what psychedelics offers is snow on your consciousness. It's fresh powder for you to cut new trails, new neural pathways. So this offers you new perception. And again, it gets you out of stagnancy, all sorts of things. I'm not a big proponent of that. Everyone
should say very quickly on a grand scale, and Sean, please forgive us if you do have to go, but on a grand scale, thank you. If you look, for example, at like where psychedelics come from, say mushrooms, for example, Mother Nature. Mother Nature's trying to perhaps give us some entertaining tools to use to both learn and enjoy.
This is one of my favorite. And I agree with you. And this is where like the Stoned Ape theory with Terrence McKenna and the Food of the Gods come into where ancient hominids were strolling around that jump in consciousness. Right. And one of the interesting things too, speaking of psychedelics, to tie it right now back into entities and the structure of the universe is that some say that psilocybin is a entity in itself. And then it basically hijacks your consciousness.
Right.
But it does it in a super dope way rather than what we refer to affectionately as a lizard turd. Not all lizard peoples are turds, but there are lizard turds. But what I would say to that is it doesn't do that in that way, because what does it do? It makes you very cognizant of nature. It makes you, love animals or respect all these things, which it allows you to have the same reverence for its living conditions. It does. It also grows along trails as to encourage you to pick them up and then to transport them.
Right.
I mean, jumping on like your back literally with spores to then transport themselves to be appealing, to be consumed. It's fascinating when you start looking at things this way, because then you say, well, maybe our vehicle is just an interface object, like a water bag that's contacting the earth, like Elsa Dillon says, for these different hosts.
You just described what's called Bayesian statistics by active inference, Dr. Carl Friston.
No big deal. Fucking crushed it at that.
That's what they're proposing.
Yeah.
The idea there's multiple layers of input and output.
Yes. So then, because you really look at it, you're not your body, you're not any of this shit, but at a deeper, if you want to go microscopic, you're 75 trillion cells all saying, we do want you to survive. And it's like this fascinating co-collaboration on every level.
Right.
It's beautiful. So then you say, okay, well, what's this body and what's Gaia? Is it living as well? This realm, this place that we're on, is this a living being? And we're the cells that comprise it. And there's a disharmony. There's a dis-ease in Gaia that, is this singularity that it's looking for. And maybe that's what the singularity is. It's basically like a Tylenol that it took to heal its headache, which is us, this parasite that can't get its shit together and focuses on duality.
Right.
I don't know.
When I first encountered the idea of a Boltzmann brain, it was on the boat ride to Guadalupe Island. Lou had handed me his phone and said, read this email. And it was just a discussion, not top secret anything, not even secret anything. Just a discussion amongst colleagues about Boltzmann brains and about the idea of, the spontaneous creation of a consciousness within a stable thermodynamic environment, right? A homogeneous thermodynamic environment. And from a science fiction story writing standpoint, a lot of times what I'll do is take these ideas and try to fit them into a little vignette, a little episode in my mind of Dark Mirror or something like that.
Right.
And I thought to myself about what the Hindus say and a lot of the other religions say about the origin of the universe. And I thought about our observational data that seems flawed, but leads towards some kind of energetic beginning, like a big bang or an extrusion from some point. And I started thinking to myself, well, whatever existence is, if it had been around long enough for a certain period of time, the entropy would lead it to some thermodynamic homogeneous environment. And if there was a spontaneous creation of consciousness, such as a Boltzmann brain there, and it found itself conscious but alone with no resources and facing eternity, I can see where consciousness would want to break itself into millions of parts.
Yeah.
And try to rediscover self-love, if anything else. The idea of boredom alone is the easiest thing, I think, for a human to understand. So I have a feeling that what you and I are as humans is the highest level of technology in the observable universe. I have a feeling that we, as an essence, made this entire experience for ourselves to have something to do. And that UAP are other conscious entities bifurcated into this existence doing what they want to do. Because the alternative is nothing.
By definition of your ones and zeros. Right. Exactly.
I'm going to wrap it back. Guess where? Psychedelics. So there's a state called the void, and it is this state of pure detachment, but there is an awareness within the void that all of this is made up and that none of it's real and that you are the one projecting it. And it is a hard awareness. And
when you come back from it, that knowing smile is the thing that when you turn to each other and you're like, you son of a bitch. I can still feel you. I feel who you are. Man, it's drifting away, but there's that moment where we all know that thing and it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It just is, for lack of a better description. Right.
And we can attain that through yoga and meditation as well. It's more subtle.
Yeah.
Right.
It's getting buff with a 3-pound barbell instead of a 45-pound barbell. You're gonna get cut and fast. You're not gonna get super strong. But I think, well, now I'm admitting that we know that when you utilize psychedelics in that frame of mind, it's like having an exoskeleton. Suddenly you can lift anything.
Yes.
Yes.
You see with different eyes. Your sensory data input's crazy. Your vision's crazy. Your hearing's crazy.
Right. Certain studies out of Johns Hopkins have said where the subjects have come up, like when the experience was over, these individuals would say to the doctors that were studying them, like trying to explain that what they learned from there, in not all, but many cases, were what they experienced during that trip or whatever we'd like to call it was more real than anything here. Mm-hmm. And the doctors are like with their notepads and they're trying to say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And they're like, no, you don't get it. There was more real than here.
I've got,
let's remember Go ahead. Let's remember the Michael Pollan. One of the most important things Michael Pollan introduced mainstream folks to is the idea that psychedelics do not create hallucinations. Hallucinations are what we call a fake overlay.
Yeah.
You know, they're what we call an overlay that has no value in reality, that it's a psychological construct. What Michael Pollan showed us is that psychedelics remove barriers from the brain and bring in more quantitative information about the reality we're experiencing than we were prior to taking the hallucinogenics. So you're not experiencing a hallucination. You're experiencing more input. Now it's the question as to how you interpret that through your own experience and analytical overlay.
100%. Wow. Yes. This is where the data input comes in at full steam. And this is also where why psychedelics are beneficial for things like PTSD. A good buddy of mine, Carlos Tanner, runs the Ayahuasca Foundation in Iquitos, Peru. That's where Zac Efron went and did his Down to Earth show. Oh, that's nice. Carlos's place. He's cool shit. One thing that he talked about is this state of hypersensitivity. And you enter this in many different ways. Trauma is another one. So we don't even need to go into all that. But trauma gets you into this hyper state of awareness. And then you plant seeds of trauma out here. And when you return back to baseline, they're out here just stuck in your subconscious like thorns. And those are the things that affect you and manifest in certain ways. So this is where psychedelics allow you to open the door back to that hypersensitive state to retrieve those fucking thorns and pluck them out and go, no, thank you. So these ideas, again, of these altered states. Now, I've talked about this as well, being an avid psychonaut, that's the real reality. And that actually we don't need to perceive it that way from this state, our baseline state, because there's a different experience to be had here. And that would be way too distracting. It's far too dope as shit. But what I mean to say is that then it feels like this is the trip, like what we're doing now. Right. This is the support. Yeah.
So as psychonauts, let's pay the people a little bit. And let's say that oh boy, I might have one of those moments where my thought decided it didn't want to be said.
Barrier.
Give me one quick second. Let's see if I can do this. Nope, it's gone.
No problem.
And I was going to say Rick Strassman, to tie it back in. He got people had him on the show. He wrote DMT, the spirit molecule. And in that, he talked about these intravenous DMT studies where he would put folks under for a long time. Now, this is where I'm tying it back to the relation reality. That he would put folks in to be psychic warriors, basically in this realm to go make contact in another way rather than hopping on a ship, which then again leads to what we're talking about, if that it's an introspective process. It's an awareness. It's all found right in here.
I remembered what I was going to say. So when we brainwave activity, okay?
Right.
We seem pretty chill. We seem pretty in flow right now. I'm sure we're probably right below beta, probably in a high alpha.
Right.
You know, most of us at any given time are in beta. If you have a full bladder, you're in higher beta. You're closer to fight or flight. But let's go back to this idea that trauma seems to open certain logic gates for some people and close them for others.
Right.
That brain state of intense spiritual expansion, is up in the gamma. Okay. When we meditate towards the void, we meditate into alpha and down into theta sometimes. And if you screw up, you fall asleep and go into delta. However, crossing the threshold from theta alpha in that void state, going around beta into gamma is where we start having those more spiritual connections, that intuitive experience.
Right.
I believe that whatever is at our core, our authentic essence, that unnamed person in you that will continue on in my belief.
Right.
I believe there are moments where the person inside us is able to take advantage of that trauma, where it says, you know what, if we just kicked you up about 10 more hertz, this will open a door for you that you weren't going to learn to open otherwise. Or maybe it happens by accident. Maybe it's just a question of resonance. You could be completely freaked out, and then something in your local environment could give you the binaural beat, shall we say, to the end of your freak out at beta, giving you that little push of just a few hertz to get you over into a different way of thinking and a different mode of feeling. So it doesn't happen for everybody. Some people go into trauma and they get pushed down to the lower vibrations. And I know folks don't like those talks, but the fact is all these woo-woo talks about vibrations match brainwave activity. They correspond to entrainment and binaurals, and they should be studied.
Well, and I'm going to clarify that it's not hierarchical. It's simply spatial when we talk about these things. And so that gives us credence.
That in physics, it would be discrete.
There you go.
Yeah, discrete topology.
Diplomatic. Yeah, diplomatic topology.
Sean, everything you just said there, I took as this right over here, the traditional Ankh or the Y. And the reason I say that is because relative to what you were saying about taking that ebb and flow from, say, one path to maybe a more suitable one for your resonance. And so I just couldn't help but think of that and the way it fractalizes.
Well, and that's also what we were talking about the Archon soul trap, the light, right?
Oh, right. Yes,
so what is the other alternative? I'm curious to, because I've actually asked this question to many folks talking in consideration to the Archon soul trap. What's the option? Because I've heard turn around back to your body, which isn't necessarily a thing, but I've also heard if you turn around, you reveal everything. And that actually you see that it's a whole huge game. What have you heard? Is it just off to the side? Is it up or down? What do you think? Oh,
I tend to agree with the last thing that you said, where so I just came back. I spoke at the Ozarks UFO conference last month, and that was the Kingdom of Dolores Cannon. And if you're not familiar with Dolores Cannon, she did an incredible amount of hypnotic regression over the years. And she wasn't even specifically originally involved with UFOs or past lives or anything like this. But she got to a point where she was having her patients ended up having descriptions of the same types of experiences and things like that. So she had developed a technique to hold people in that place when they began describing it, to keep them in that frame of mind so they could continue describing the environment, the reality, and what that portion of their self knew. So one of the things that she determined was that this is a school, that we do come here voluntarily, that there is an interim that looks very much like this life, or perhaps we only perceive it that way, but where the people we are involved with in this life had planned out this existence and this is one of those things where this will make people who are in pain angry. Right. Okay. This will make people who are experiencing what they consider negativity and lack angry. But according to Dolores, before we enter this life, we agree on almost every point that we're going to go through. And that what we end up feeling when we feel resistance, hate, pain, all of these things is because the aspect of us that does have free will, that must make these choices, is making choices that are counter to what our original plan was. So let's say that two people have a relationship, and that relationship grows to a point where they're going to separate, or someone has a business together that's the same way. One person feels they need more freedom. They want to branch out. They want to continue making choices in their life. The other person cannot see past the event horizon of this loss. So they rail against the separation or the dissolution of the company. They cannot accept it. They can't see their future any longer. They don't know how they're going to move forward. This thing was a foundation of who I am. That leads to pain, depression, anxiety, horrible places in the human psyche.
Lack of self-improvement.
The things that make us scream no, no, no are the very things that we need to say, I must accept this. And when you understand the difference between the selfish barometer of your ego and the authentic barometer of your heart, or when you begin understanding that pendulum does swing back and forth, and that the way that it manifests itself within feeling in your body and words in your mind, we're not always our best advocate. We actually want to be good people. We actually want to be respected and loved for our actions. There are very few of us that you can get us safe, quiet, warm, fed, and ask them that they want, and have them go, I want everything in your wallet and everything at your house, and I want all of your fame, and I want all of your integrity. No, they go, I'm just happy to be here right now. because in that moment of safetiness, you realize this is it. We're here for each other.
Right.
So
this reminds me, if I may say, I was listening to Whitley Strieber recently promoting his most recent book, and something I found quite peculiar is that to everything you said, Sean, he claims that again, I'm paraphrasing, forgive me, Mr. Strieber, if you hear this and I'm not phrasing this correctly, but he was paraphrasing this, or I'm paraphrasing, where he stated that his wife, who has since passed away physically in the physical, has come back to him spiritually and is saying to him essentially, you need to realize this, what we call this reality, is a game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think
Just a ride.
We've all seen A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
That was with
Russell Crowe.
Russell Crowe. That was the first time as an adult I didn't go to college. That was the first time I was introduced to game theory. And I had a little bit of trouble in the beginning understanding that a game didn't mean Fortnite or Call of Duty or Monopoly or hopscotch. And then I finally wrapped my head around the idea every single thing we do is a game. Making breakfast is a game.
Yes.
Right.
Opening your mouth to speak is a game. Right. It's all a game. That a game is a voluntary interaction with some sort of set of rules with an outcome that is binary. Loss, win. Everything we do is a game.
Yeah. Just existing in a participatory universe.
Like a magnet, push pull, essentially.
But a game doesn't mean it's not important. Right. And also, if this whole thing is a game, it doesn't mean it is either important or unimportant. I think we have all the time in the world to figure our own mission out.
Yeah.
You can take as long as you want.
Right.
I love that.
Right. But I think, in my opinion, that would be a beautiful way to wrap it up if that works. But Sean, I want to thank you so much for the incredible, first off, incredible conversation, but also the extended time that you so graciously granted us. So thank you so very much. And I would love for you to have the last word if there's anything you'd like to say to either Brandon's audience or my audience or anything of the sort.
Oh boy.
Only if you want to, don't.
And I just wanted to thank you as well. It's outstanding.
I'm really heartened by the conversation we're having, we've just had, the conversations you and I have offline, the way that I see people responding to these ideas. 25 years ago, I couldn't find anybody to talk about these things. It wasn't safe to talk about hallucinogens. It wasn't safe to talk about UAP. It wasn't safe to talk about consciousness or meditation or out-of-body experiences, especially as it related to personal experience. And now, because of a lot of different people, yourselves included especially, we're able to have these conversations because we're being bold, we're being courageous, but we're also being pragmatic. We're also utilizing the scientific method. We're not trying to start cults. We're not charging people, to go out and stare at what they can see themselves in the sky. Right. So I'm very heartened. I hope that your audience keeps looking to accentuate the positive, keeps turning the other cheek when it comes to the folks who want to see nice things break. Right. And I just I want to say thanks to you guys for having me here. This was one of the most interesting and wholesome conversations I've had in a long time.
Thank you so much. Well, and take care, everyone. To those watching or listening, thank you so much.